I wanted to open with a quote a book I'm reading by Cheryl Bear. It's called First Nations Ministry, but this kind of gives you a little glimpse into what nations world is. So Jesus must be fully incarnated into the indigenous culture in order for a First Nations person to be an authentic indigenous Christian. If Christianity cannot relate to who one is as an indigenous person, then it is not true Christianity. When a people group gives up their identity in order to become Christians, they become a grotesque caricature of that nation, which is not something Creator intended. So, many of you know that with Native ministry, we've had a hard road, a hard history, 500 years of evangelism, and not very successful. There have been a lot of racial and historical and spiritual trauma that have happened among the Native American people. And so from the beginning, there have been messages of Native people being told that they're inferior, that their identity is not as good, or that it's bad, and that it's not worthy of the Creator's presence. And so therefore, you have to take on someone's own identity in order to be accepted by the Creator. And so those have been the attempts throughout history of like assimilation. If assimilation didn't work, then there was termination, genocide. There was relocation in the 50s, where they tried to move natives out of their reservations into cities to assimilate them. So there have been many attempts through just trying to wipe out the Native identity. And so even before there can be a conversation of evangelism or even discipleship, there has to be a pre-conversation of the historical and spiritual trauma that has happened to the Native people. But you will, as we just are filled with the Holy Spirit, we come into contact with Native students who are seeking and wanting to know what it means to be Native and Christian. And so for Donnie's and I's and Bobby's generation, and before that, we had people like Richard Twiss, we have Randy Woodley, Terry LeBlanc. That generation has been asking, is it okay to be Native and Christian? And the answer is yes. So now the students that are coming in involved with nations are now asking the question, yes, I am Native and Christian, but am I doing it well? And so now these students are like taking on this full identity of like, yes, I'm Native, yes, I'm following Christ, I'm trying to worship Creator in the context of my identity, but am I doing it right? So they're practicing, and there's a wide spectrum of students that are involved in nations that are seekers. They're not believers, but they continue to keep coming. And then there's on the other side, or the other end of the spectrum of Native students that are believers, but they're just trying to figure out how to do it well, how to be Native and Christian and do it well. And so, so as we think about discipling a nation student, going along the lines of the Wind Belt Send, in nations we've changed the language. We've changed it to restore, nurture, serve, because that's how it makes sense in our community. Restore, as you disciple a nation student, you're helping Native students restore holiness, and the way that happens is relating to one another. One thing that you'll find with nation students or Native students is that there's a lot of connections clan-wise. When you're asked who you are, it's like you're in relation to the land, but you're also in relation to other people. So when I introduce myself, I usually introduce my clans. That's because I'm related to people in the room, and that's a way for me to figure out who's my aunties, who's my grandmas, grandpas. You figure out how you are related to one another, but then you're also figuring out how you are in relation to the land. And so with Restoring Holiness, as you disciple Native students, you're teaching your students how to relate to one another, teaching them what a good marriage looks like, what does good relationships look like, what does a good friendship look like. And then on the build side, which is translated in Nations to nurture peacemaking, seeking peace and healing. We strive to help them get a sense of who they are individually and in relation to their relatives. So ways that can happen is, just helping them, encourage them to seek mentorship with elders, to speak with elders. If you're trying to figure out what to do in a weekly meeting for nations, invite the Native elders to come and speak to the students, and have these students listen to the elder stories, because there's a powerful connection that helps them relate to who they are down to their roots, and what's happened throughout history with their elders. And so have that space where you can invite the Native elders and the Native students to come together to relate to one another. Another way to nurture peacemaking is to help them maintain their culture. A lot of these students are differing grades of, like, they're very contextualized, or a lot of them just don't want to talk about being Native because it's just so hard. And so even just encouraging them to help maintain their culture by inviting them to make their cultural foods, encouraging them to share their creation stories with one another. There's a lot of really good conversations when students do that, because they see similarities in their creation stories between different tribes. Helping them to learn their language, asking them how they see Christ in their culture, acknowledging that Christ was already there before we were, and then listening to stories of how their elders see Christ in that tribe or in their culture, in their village. So send, which translates to serve in nations, is to help them serve themselves and others to learn resilience, coaching them and helping them make connections, help them to look for opportunities for self-discovery, help them to nurture a positive view of themselves. I know a lot of times, like, I struggle in that tension of living in two worlds, and I've always just wanted someone to encourage me that being Zuni is, like, it's a good thing. And so just having that encouragement there is just really key to helping someone serve and going and sending, because they'll be doing that in turn with other students. So a lot of people ask us, like, what's my part? What can I do? And so some things that we've been thinking about is just, listen. Have an open ear and listen to the students' stories and believe them. It's probably hard to really grasp and empathize with the experience of a Native student or a Native person, but just please try your hardest to believe us. It may not be very familiar, but just, listen and believe us. And sometimes even your silence is powerful. There's no need to really have any words or say anything, but just your silence and your presence there is powerful for us, because it helps us know that there's someone in the journey with us. Advocate for us. Use your influence and your power to represent our voice. And when we're strong enough, encourage us to use our own voice too, to kind of help that along. But me, who's going to talk?